to Syria now, where government troops have stormed the rebel northern border town of Jisr al-Shugar with tanks and military helicopters. The army has entered the city in order to, quote, cleanse it from rebellious armed groups, which killed at least 120 police officers last week. Meanwhile, Britain and France are still pushing for a UN resolution condemning the brutal crackdown against anti-government activists in Syria. Russia, which opposes any attempts to intervene in the Syrian conflict, said it won't back the move. Well, for more on this, we can cross live to Adrian Salbucci, an author and political researcher based in Buenos Aires. Thanks for being with us. The UN is considering a new resolution condemning the crackdown, I should say, on anti-government protests. However, it includes neither sanctions nor military action. What's the point then of this kind of resolution? Will the goalpost be moved later, as you see it?
Well, the UN permanently moves the goalposts, and the United Nations, let's be very blunt about this, is merely an international organization working to promote the interests of its most powerful members, notably the United States, Britain, and as far as the Western world is concerned, also France and other countries in the European Union. Because just as they are considering cracking down on the Syrian government, they have not considered cracking down on the governments of Bahrain or Egypt at a point in time when there was also internal strife. I think it's very important to understand that the Western media, unfortunately, give us slices of information every day on hugely complex problems, so that the public opinion is very well informed but understands very little of what is happening. We have to see this in the proper historical perspective, that what is happening in Syria and simultaneously in almost all countries in the Middle East and in North Africa reflects internal problems. All countries have internal problems, no doubt about it. And there is a genuine desire on the part of many people in Syria, no doubt, to get rid of its very fossilized governments. But there is also external interference, notably from the United States and from Britain and from France, to take advantage of these internal problems to promote their own agenda, which might have news-speak terminology like promoting democracy, but I hardly think that that is the real question. There is a hidden agenda, and we might even find some of the results of that hidden agenda after the ongoing Bilderberg conference that is taking place in St. Moritz in Switzerland.
Violence in Syria shows no sign of abating, and I spoke to the NATO chief on Thursday, and he said the alliance is not going to intervene in Syria. He was very frank about it. Do you think we'll be quoting that back to him as a contradiction in the future?
I saw that wonderful interview you made, and I think he probably spoke more than he would have liked, and well, the following days and weeks to come will tell. But I think we have to look at it from the following perspective. Certainly, Syria is cracking down on rebels who are trying to rip the country apart, irrespective of whether they have genuine grievances or whether they are supported from foreign, unconfessable instruments. And also the same is happening in Libya. But I would ask, what would the United States of America do if Texas were to try to secede from the Union? What would Britain do if Surrey or Scotland were to try to secede from the Union? Or what would France do if Normandy tried to secede from the Union? Any country which is sovereign and wants to resolve its own internal problems must take action against secessionist groups, irrespective of whether they have justifiable grievances or not. So here, I think we have to be very careful, and NATO already has a long history of acting illegally, as it acted in the 1999 war in Serbia and Kosovo, where it went in militarily without a mandate from the United Nations and committed such atrocities when bombing Belgrade, for example, in Serbia, of bombing hospitals, schools, school buses, and even the Chinese embassy. And it seems that Mr. Rasmussen seems to have forgotten that.
I take it that means you think NATO will, in fact, intervene in Syria. I'd like to turn to Libya briefly. This week, reports earlier this week suggested that NATO sees Colonel Gaddafi as a legitimate target because he is, of course, head of the military. Do you think they have that kind of authority to kill Gaddafi without bringing him to justice?
Well, it's the equivalent of saying that NATO has the authority to kill any head of state. All heads of state happen to be the heads of their military, whether it be Mr. Obama in America, Sarkozy in France, or David Cameron in Britain. What NATO is telling the world, and you have to read this between the lines, that irrespective of legal coverage or not, irrespective of whether they are right or wrong, and I believe they are permanently wrong, they have the power, the force, the brutal force to impose their agenda, their interest, and their objectives upon weaker people. And what they do have is they count with the support of the global, or rather the mainstream media in the West, CNN, Fox News, the BBC, the New York Times, the Daily Telegraph, the Washington Post. And with that media coverage promoting psychological warfare upon public opinion, they feel that they have all the military resources to impose brutal force. So if anything, what NATO is telling the world is, we have the armament, we're going to impose our agenda on every country in the world, whether you like it or not. That's why I say what is happening in the Middle East and what is happening in North Africa should be a wake-up call for everybody, because we might see it soon happening, for example, in my region of Latin America.
All right, Adrian Salbucci, author and researcher, on the line with us from Buenos Aires. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.